the class. You're all back. So what we're going to start with is a chapter. It's not, this first section is not from the book. Information that I've put together, just like the basics of economics and how we want to be thinking in this class. I basically edited one of the textbook's PowerPoints, so it's in like the same basic style, and I put that on Canvas, so you'll have this to study from. Plus, I'm filming the classes, so you get to, if you need to, I don't know, if you're having trouble falling asleep one night, you put this on, watch it, be out in a couple minutes. Yes. So today what we're going to talk about is the three assumptions of economics. The three things we basically need to be true in order to do economic analysis. Without them, it makes it really difficult to study this. Next, we're going to look at the guideposts to economic thinking. There are like 7 or 8 different things that we need to keep in our mind while we're working through this class. These are like just general basics that we need to know. Then we'll talk about 2 different types of analysis that we'll be doing in this class, or that you can do. And then we'll talk about the role of competition, what function competition plays in an economy. So let's get started. What exactly is this class about? Everyone in here have Econ 101 already? Anyone not? Okay. This is going to be different than an Econ 101 class that you guys have taken. You don't need Econ 101 to know what's going on here. But the way a lot of Econ 101 classes and a lot of Econ 102 classes are taught is you get a lot of math, and you're told to solve these problems. It's sort of applied math to try to estimate what firms are going to do, or how many consumers are going to want to buy something, what the price should be, things like that. In this class, we're taking a slightly different approach to it. We're going to look at how people make choices as they try to attain their goals. It said here, choices are necessary because we live in a world of scarcity. You have to make decisions between one thing or another. So we're trying to understand what's going on in the human mind. How do we go about trying to reach these decisions that we're going to make? So it's a little bit less like an applied math class, and a little bit more like a social science class. Not to say I'm going to be teaching you guys like it's a sociology class or something, but it's there's a little bit more nuance than you would get in a lot of Econ 101 classes. And that's sort of one of the reasons why I take this lens, and some economists take this lens, is I went to George Mason for grad school, and that they have a slightly different way of looking at economics than a lot of the profession does. It's not very different, but it's more focusing on individuals and how things happen in the real world, instead of creating these models that abstract away from what's really going on. So hopefully what you'll be able to do from this class is look at someone making a decision, or look at yourself making a decision, and understand what's going on behind it. Again, rather than just being able to draw a couple cost curves and say, well, the firm is going to produce where marginal cost is the lowest. Because that's simple. There's not much there for that. But again, we need to make these choices because we live in a world of scarcity. Scarcity is when our wants exceed the limited resources available. Obviously, as humans, we have unlimited wants. If you give somebody everything they ask for right now, if I asked one of you, what, tell me everything you need to make you happy materially, and I give you all that, within a week or so, you'd start to want more, because we tend to have unlimited wants. So what economics does is study the choices that people make in order to attain their goals, given the fact that we have scarce resources. So because we can't have everything we want, how do we go about choosing the things we want the most? So we study these choices using economic models, which are simplified versions of reality. the fact that they're simplified makes them easy to work with. So we assume away certain problems that we face in the world. So that way they're possible for us to work with. However, because we have to assume away certain problems, that we have to simplify things, they're not completely applicable. So one of the important things is to understand when these models don't cover what's going on in the real world, what the shortcomings are, and when it's appropriate to use them. So it's very easy. There's this theory we'll talk about later called perfect competition. It has a very specific set of assumptions. When they don't hold, it's not applicable. So if you try to use it in a situation where it's not applicable, you're going to end up saying people should be doing one thing when they're really doing something else. So it's important to remember when these apply and when they don't apply. So economics is the study of human action. The great economist Ludwig von Mises, he published a book back in the 1940s, a giant tome on economics, which he titled Human Action, because that's really what we're getting at. Anytime there's choice involved, we need to use these tools to understand what's going on. So this framework that we use, that we're going to build throughout this class, applies to all humans at all times. So if we look at buying and selling goods or services, we look at politics, we look at crime, family interactions, religion, all of these things, we can use economics to understand individuals' decision making. There's some really interesting studies about religion using the tools of economics. One I'll talk about real briefly is witch trials in Europe. The Catholic Church for hundreds of years was against witch trials, but people like the common folk really wanted witch trials because they believed in witchcraft. After the Protestant Reformation, in a lot of places in Europe, there was Protestant churches and Catholic churches, and they had to compete over getting parishioners. So what we saw in those areas, the Catholic Church began allowing witch trials because the Protestant churches allowed witch trials. So it was a form of competition between two churches to try to get more customers or more parishioners. And what we see is in areas where there was just Catholic churches, they didn't change their teachings, that they still did not allow witch trials to happen. So we can think of what happened in these cases in terms of competition. In terms of crime, people face choices. For some people, there's legal options and illegal options. So if they're trying to figure out what's going to make themselves the best off, committing crimes is one of those choices. So if you make crimes more costly, people are less likely to commit them. If you make them less costly, people are less likely to commit them. If you can understand how much sentencing matters, how much the likelihood of being apprehended, actually committing the crime matters, the likelihood of conviction if you're caught, how much that matters. And you can see how that affects people's decisions to commit crimes or not. And also, not just does it apply to all different types of human action, but applies all over. So Rome suffered a hyperinflation at one point, nearly 2,000 years ago. Zimbabwe suffered a hyperinflation within the past couple decades. The people in both of these places reacted the same way. They were caused by similar causes. We can use the tools of economics to understand both of those, not just things that are happening right now, but things that happened far in the distant past. A lot of times when I tell people that I major in economics or I work as an economist, they ask me what the stock market's going to do. And this class is going to go far beyond what the stock market does. What we really want to understand is how decisions in various parts of the economy affect the allocation of resources in ways that raise or lower the material well-being of society. I don't want to put just well-being because there's obviously a lot more to having a happy life than having a lot of stuff. But it's a lot easier to be happy if if you have enough. If you have enough food, you have enough clothing, you have a house. The material well-being is important of society, and some things we do are going to help society get better off, help us make more goods, provide more services, do so cheaper. Some things will make us worse off. We'll reduce the incentive to produce goods and services. We'll combine resources in inefficient ways, so people could be better off, but we're not as good because of shortcomings in what we're doing. So the word economics comes from the Greek oikonomia, which basically means the management of a household. I don't really like that term. It gives the illusion of like one person planning, like doling out all the money, deciding what's going to happen. There's another word that it comes from a different Greek word. I don't remember the Greek word. The term catalytics, which is basically human action, human decision making. And I like that a lot more because it gives a lot more richness and more understanding to what we're actually doing here. So here are some typical economics questions and one less typical economics question. So we'll be able to answer by the end of the class, how are the prices of goods and services determined? What goes into that? How does pollution affect the economy? And how should and how can the government deal with these effects? Talk about why does government control the prices of some goods and services? And what are the effects of those controls? Are they good or are they bad? Or are they neutral? What is the rule of entrepreneurs? Most of you guys are freshmen, so I'm assuming you haven't had Dean Fry yet for his any of his classes. He talks about entrepreneurship all the time. And I'm sure you've got at least a taste of that and like, still have to take business 101? Intro to business one. Okay, so you talk about entrepreneurs there, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you'll understand from an economist perspective, what is the role of entrepreneurs? I was kind of shocked when, we didn't really talk about that in undergrad in econ classes, but when I got to grad school, there's a big focus on what entrepreneurs do and what problems they solve and how important they are to the economy. So you'll get a slightly different view, still just as positive, maybe even more so, but a slightly different way of looking at what they do and how much value they provide. Finally, why does gypsy law forbid using the same utensils for gypsies as non-gypsies? They have a very weird set of rules that all serve a very important purpose. So, here are the three key economic assumptions, and we're going to need these in order to do analysis. The first is methodological individualism. What that means is that the individual person is a unit of analysis. So all social phenomena emerge from individual actions and interactions with other people. So instead of looking at groups of people, we're narrowing down on one person and seeing what's going on in their mind while they're making a decision, whether they're choosing to buy a product, whether they're going through the entrepreneurial process and creating a new product. All these different things. I was going to use a movie as an example, and I never got around to thinking of that. Has anyone in here seen Kill the Irishman? Anyone else? I watched that like 2 days before I taught this class last year. So for those of you that don't know, it's the story about this guy named Danny Green who was, he was like a union leader, got involved in organized crime. It was him versus the mafia. Obviously, you can tell by the title, he was Irish. Mafia was Italian. If you just looked at this as groups, you would say, okay, like the Italians and the Irish didn't like each other, so pretty clear why they would like butt head to head, why they would come into conflict. But it turns out Danny Green worked for the mob for years. He was getting involved in it and moving up. And then one of his lower level guys got arrested while committing a crime for him. He lost all that money and he was supposed to pay the mob boss back. And he said, no, I'm not paying you. He was really stubborn. The mob boss who had like brought him up like through the ranks felt betrayed. So there was a lot of personal animosity and personal problems going on. that if you don't look at this as individuals, like the individuals involved, you miss that. So it's important to understand what's going on with individuals when we're doing this analysis. It's not that groups can't tell us anything. Obviously, when you split people up into different groups, those groups have things in common. So it can make it easier to discuss what's going on. It can give you an idea of common characteristics shared by them. So I'm not saying that you can never talk about groups of people, but to focus as much as possible on individuals being involved is what we want to do. The next is purposeful action. Individuals act purposely in order to satisfy their wants. You don't just go around doing random stuff for no reason. When you act with an end in mind. I didn't bring my lunch today, so when I go up to the new Frankie's later, I'm gonna go walk up there with a purpose. Like, I'm going up there to get food. Like, I'm not just going to walk around randomly and then find myself somewhere with food. I don't know if that was a good example, but that's all I could think of. It's not to say that people only act to like satisfy their wants, or they only care about money. What it is to say is that we act with a purpose. That there's some motivation behind our action. We're not just randomly responding or just like involuntarily responding to stimuli. Finally is economizing behavior. Individuals economize by considering the costs and benefits of their action. So when we try to do something, we seek our desired ends. We try to get our goal with the lowest possible cost. Obviously, if you have two identical products stand like right next to each other, one is more expensive than the other, you're going to opt for the less expensive one if they're exactly the same. You're not going to willingly spend extra or do extra things that may end up making you worse off. You're going to try to make yourself the best off as possible. So people are rational. And what we mean by rational is that they act in their best interest as they see it. So this is from their own perspective. They may not be right. Who here has had buyer's remorse? I mean, who hasn't, bought in a shirt and then a week later be like, that was stupid. That looks like crap. Like, why would I even? Maybe it was the tricky lighting in there. Maybe once you actually put it on and looked at it, you thought it was crappy. There's a million different things. Maybe you just got the wrong burger at a restaurant. In the moment, you thought you were acting in your best interest. You thought you were picking the best burger in the restaurant. Afterwards, it turns out, it didn't taste so good. Had you known that, you'd have gotten the other one. So you can, if you're acting rational, you still can be wrong. But in that moment, you think you are right. If people are presented multiple choices, they're going to choose the best choice for them. You're not going to knowingly pick the second best option. And remember, this is using costs and benefits. So it's not just saying we're not just talking about the quality of the product. You go to a restaurant, there's like $100 steak and like a $10 burger. You don't have a ton of money in your budget, you're not going to buy the $100 steak because the cost is too much. You're going to get a benefit, but it's because of the price tag, because of the high cost, the benefit's only slightly higher for you. It's not going to be your best option. So the most important part of this is that if people aren't rational, we can't do economic analysis. That makes what we do in here impossible. If people aren't going to act in their self-interest and do what's best for them, you're not going to be able to predict how they're going to respond to something. There's this idea called nudge theory. Has anyone heard of that? The book came out probably like 8 years ago, and people were talking about like in the news. Some people thought it was great. Some people were like super worried about it. So it was like controversy for a little bit, and then everyone immediately forgot about it. But the idea is that people don't make the best choices for themselves, that they're irrational. So we need to just kind of nudge them in the right direction. So you put, I don't know, grocery stores put healthy food out in front, so people are more likely to pick it. Automatically enroll employees in 401k instead of making them opt into it. So that way they're naturally making these decisions. But that implies that people are rational because they're going to respond the way that you predict. If the healthy food's right there, they're going to select it because it's easier. It implies that they're weighing these costs and benefits. So if people were being irrational, these nudges wouldn't work, or any law or regulation wouldn't work, because you wouldn't know how people are going to respond to it. So people may appear irrational to you. You may not understand why someone would choose something you think is so terrible, but they somehow think is great. But that's because we all have different, what economists call utility functions. We all like different things. So for example, my dad eats Little Caesars pizza. And you guys eat that? I think it's awful. But it's $5 and it's hot and it's ready, which he thinks is the greatest thing in the world. Even though it's a saltine cracker with like squeezy cheese on top. He will get that over like a good like pizza that barely costs any more that you have to wait for some reason. From my perspective, that's completely irrational. But from his perspective, I guess the fact that it's hot and ready. That's another example. Okay, so cheap light beer versus IPAs. When I was an undergrad, I drank Milwaukee Special Reserve Light, which was the cheapest beer in Cambria County. It used to be $14.50 for a 30 rack, but the price went up some cents. You just say why? No. Oh. Some people drink, like the fancy IPAs, like really expensive, where it's like $5 for like one bottle, that they think it's so good. I thought in undergrad that's irrational. Why would you waste all that money to sip on a beer that like tastes good but isn't going to do anything for you? Well, at the same time, my friends that are like that said, "Why the hell are you drinking that piss water? Might as well be drinking Coors Light." I said, "Well, it's cheap and it gets me drunk. That's perfect. That's all I need." We had totally different desires, different goals, different tastes and preferences. We both thought each other was acting irrationally, but really we both were trying to maximize what we saw as our benefit from those beers. That's not to say that, again, this under-economized behavior and rationality, that people never make mistakes. There were robots that perform calculations. A lot of this stuff goes on in the back of our heads. People are hyper-intelligent. Obviously, we're wrong all the time. We're missing knowledge all the time. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. You guys have any questions about the 3 assumptions? All right. So next, let's start the guideposts to economic thinking. Now, these ideas aren't for you guys to just like memorize. That I'm gonna ask you to like spit out later on, like on an exam or something. These are different things in economics, different basics that that we need in order to do analysis. Important things for you guys to remember as we're going through this. So think of this as just different things to keep in the back of your mind, and different techniques to use, rather than just a list to memorize. So the first guidepost is scarcity. As I mentioned, there's a lack of resources to meet the wants of everyone. That there just isn't enough stuff in the world for what we like desire to have in our lives. There's far-reaching implications from this lack of stuff. Basically, we're forced to make choices between limited resources. So if we want to make ourselves as well off as possible, we need to combine these resources in the most efficient way. This podium, we could make it out of gold if we wanted to. But I think we can all see that's not the most efficient use of gold. Obviously, there's a ton of ornamental uses, but we use gold in like microchips. So think of how many computers we can make, how many smartphones we can make from the gold that would go into making this thing solid gold. Because of scarcity, we're forced to make choices. We're forced to try to use these in the most efficient way possible. Just, to make us well off. We have unlimited desires, but we have limited means to achieve those desires. So for an example, I would love to have like a giant ass mansion, get those marble countertops that HGTV says I have to have, a walk-in closet full of expensive suits, a nice mahogany bar, like all that stuff. But there's not enough resources for me to have all that right now with the amount of money I have. I'm sure you guys have a ton of desires that you want that at this point you can't afford, because there's not enough resources to have that many of whatever those things are for so much of the population. So what economists are trying to do is combine resources in the most efficient way possible to get as many of these as possible. 100 years ago, this classroom wasn't even possible. But over time, because of entrepreneurs, people with new ideas, people investing their money in businesses to get more productive capital so we can make this more efficiently, we've been able to put together this classroom, which is fairly common across the country. Which if someone would have walked in here 100 years ago, they wouldn't even know what to think. I had class in the old Schwab before they tore it down. They redid this right after I graduated. And that building was a piece of junk. Classrooms looked nothing like this. It used to be like a science building, and they had I don't know if it was tile on the floor or it was just like straight up bricks. But they had, they still had like the pipes that came up for the Bunsen burners, but they just sawed off and put some cement in. They had old chalkboards, no computers. I don't even know if they had Wi-Fi in here at that point. But because we were able to combine resources more efficiently over time, and people came up with new ideas, this building is now a reality. This classroom is now a reality. So even though we're not able to get our goal, get our desires now, over time in the future, these things can become more and more inexpensive as we find more efficient ways to make them. So next I want to compare scarcity and poverty. These seem very similar, but they end up being fairly different things. So poverty can be eradicated. We can get rid of poverty completely, but scarcity will always be with us, no matter what. Poverty is basically an arbitrary line that someone draws for a basic standard of living. Anything below that line is poverty. If you don't have a certain size house, say you don't have a car, you don't have the ability to buy a certain amount of food every month, a certain amount of clothing. It can be an amount of resources, or it can be just an income. I forget what the poverty line is. Say, I know it's not it, but say $15,000 for one person. That's the poverty line. Anything below that is considered poverty. Anything above that is not. Over time, as people become wealthier, that arbitrary line moves and it changes and becomes greater. So a poor person today has a much better life than a poor person in the past. A poor person in the past someone living in poverty in the past had a much smaller place to live, fewer articles of clothing, less food or worse food. So it's very difficult to get away from poverty because it's always going to move. It's just the lower chunk of the income distribution, basically. The absence of poverty would be everyone has met that basic standard of living. Can you guys imagine what the absence of scarcity is? I mean, obviously the definition, everyone has all their needs met, or all their wants met. But can you think in a world where everything you possibly want's available? I can't. It's very difficult. I can imagine having all the stuff I want right now, but everyone having all the stuff. It's because of the lack of resources we have. We have a finite amount of resources on this planet. So there's always going to be scarce. There's that hard limit. We can be as efficient as possible within that and get ourselves as many, always moving closer to as much as what we want, but we can never reach it because of that limit. What is this? Yeah. So poverty has been the natural state of humanity since the beginning of time. Basically, since first of all, from apes, we've lived at subsistence or near subsistence until very recently. In human development, there's this thing called the hockey stick of human development. It's basically like per capita GDP, or like the amount of money we have for stuff we can buy. It was basically a flat line for thousands of years, and then in the 1800s, shoots almost straight up. We'll talk more about later what goes into why we saw this fantastic growth in the past 200 years, why it never happened before. But the basic idea is poverty has almost always been there, and we're now finally escaping poverty. We still face scarcity. We're always going to face scarcity, but we're becoming much more efficient in combining these resources to get ourselves a lot better off. The existence of scarcity requires rationing. So every society has to figure out a way to ration their scarce resources. There's only so much you have, so how are we going to determine who gets what? So for individuals, it's who gets the finished goods, who gets these products and services that we need. For firms, which firm gets what resources to go into production, or what firm gets intermediate goods. That's like if a steel mill produces steel and it's just like a big chunk, and then not chunk, let's say they have like big I-beams. A firm buys those I-beams and uses it to create a building. It's an intermediate good because it's not being sold to consumers. It's being combined to make something else. So pretty much everyone in the world, all the Western world, we use markets in order to ration these goods. Can you guys think of other ways that you can ration who gets what in a society? There's two more that were fairly common or are fairly prominent historically, and then there's some you can just make up.
Class structure.
Class.
Depending on what class you're in.
So the upper class, they get a certain amount, and then the next class. All right, that's one way to do it. You still have to figure out who within the class gets what, or if everyone gets the same within the class. That's one way to do it. Anything else?
Like communism, where everybody gets the same.
Yep, that's one way. Central planning. So there's a government board that says everyone gets the same amount, and they just divvy up all the resources. Okay, and it's not really applicable for us, but any of you guys have friends that go to like a big college? They go to like Penn State. They ever try to get football tickets? You got to show up early, right? They show up early. It's first come, first serve, basically. Because the price is set too low, a lot more people want it, so first come, first serve. That's one way to do it. Whoever shows up gets it. What else? Yeah, central planning. There's violence. They're like cavemen. If I want something you have, I beat you with my stick, and I take it from you. I'm not saying these are good ways to do it. I'm saying these are alternate ways we can do it. You can go by height. Tallest person gets the most. They get first dibs. Oh, there's some tall people in this class, so I don't really like that. If I was the tallest, I'd like it. There's you can go by attractiveness. The most attractive person gets first dibs, and then on down the line. Again, I don't really like that one either. There's a ton of ways that we can go about rationing other than markets. I hope you can see the problems with at least most of these, just initially. But we'll go on and we'll talk throughout the compare this to the market to a couple other things, and see what's the best way to ration goods. To make sure everyone gets what they value the most, and things are being used as best they can. The second guidepost. I recognize I didn't put a 1 next to scarcity. I'll go back and do that so you guys aren't confused if you go back through studying. Competition is everywhere. Because there's limits on our choices, but not on our wants. I'll fix that because that's very oddly worded. It gives rise to competition because there's all these different alternatives we can choose and all these different people that want what we want. There's only so many resources you can use, for instance, to build Apple and Samsung phones, 2 different companies. Therefore, they have to compete with each other to buy resources. Their form of competition is just the price they're willing to pay to the people providing raw materials. Yeah. Even in a world without greed, no one was greedy, no one had any self-interest, there would still be competition. So do you donate to the Red Cross or Relay for Life? One of those two, even now in a world with greed, those 2 charities, or basically every charity, has to compete with each other to prove to potential donors that they're more deserving of the money, that they'll have a better result, they'll do more, they're going to help more needy people. Whatever it may be, there's only so much money that can be donated to them. So if they want to maximize their donations, to maximize the amount of help they give, they're going to have to prove that they're the best and compete against each other. So if you change the method of rationing, that's not going to eliminate competition. That's only going to change the form of competition that's going to take place. So the Soviet Union was centrally planned. There was still competition in there. It was just a different form. Instead of trying to offer a better product or pay more money to get that product you want, what people did was they competed to show who was most, loyal to the party. People would try to rise up within the party to get more things, because obviously important politicians end up having more than the common people. And that's not just true for central planning, it's true in a market economy, it's true in like any economy that has a government. At least in practice. People still have wants. One of the things the socialists wanted to create was, create a new man, the new man. George Bernard Shaw wrote like Man and Superman about creating this idealized person who would serve the state and the common good. But that didn't end up happening in reality. People were still self-interested. They still wanted to meet their wants. They wanted to provide for their family. So they were willing to engage in competition to try to get more for themselves, to try to make themselves better off. Next is the idea of opportunity cost. Opportunity cost is the cost, and I put that in quotes because it's not something you actually pay. It doesn't happen in real life. it's the cost of not enjoying the benefit associated with the next best choice. So, for instance, if I go out for dinner tonight, go to like a restaurant, like sit-down restaurant, so it takes like an hour, I can't go see a movie while I'm doing that. So the cost of that dinner isn't just like the price I paid, but it's also the next best choice. So if I choose to go to the movie, or choose to go to dinner, I can't go to the movie. So the cost of that dinner is the movie. So we refer to this opportunity cost as a trade-off. When you do one thing, you can't do the other. Because of scarcity, because there's only so much money we have, so many hours in the day, because of scarcity, opportunity costs exist. And again, this is subjective. It's because the alternative isn't actually acted upon, it's not realized. So this is just something like in our own mind. So again, the opportunity cost for everyone is going to be different. Maybe for you, if you got tea tonight, instead of the opportunity cost being a movie, because that's the next best alternative, maybe you wanted to go ice skating. Not really freezing out. So the opportunity cost for you would be ice skating, or would be something else. For every person, it's different. So now, yeah. So by definition, making a choice means giving something up, not doing something else. So when we think of the cost of education, obviously there's the monetary costs or the accounting cost. We pay for tuition, we pay for books. Then there's things like we give up the time to sit in the classroom. I'm sure all you guys gave up sleep to be here. If you weren't here, you'd be in bed right now. But there's also opportunity costs. There's income that you could have made. You could have gotten a job and been working. So you're giving up all that money, I don't know, experience, like whatever benefits you would get from a job, giving that up to be here. So that's the opportunity cost of a college education. You're also, if you're here, you can't be on a vacation. So I don't know if it's an option for many of you, but you're missing out on sitting on an island drinking Mai Tais right now. These are all things, I'm sure there's plenty of other things. Maybe you'd be out in Kansas City for the Titans game. One of my friends, he's a big Titans fan, so he's been going to the past couple games. He bought tickets to the game in Kansas City this week, but he didn't have enough money to get out there. So he bet on St. Francis basketball last night, and to use the winnings to get him out there. This is after he bet on Clemson to do that, and Clemson lost. St. Francis won last night, though, didn't they? Yeah, okay. So you might be able to make it out there.
What's he gonna do if they get to the Super Bowl then?
I don't know. I don't know how he's going to get himself there for the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the Titans. Like they're not going to go like every year. It's not the Patriots. So he's definitely going to be convinced that he has to go see it.
He could be taking that alone.
He'll be hitchhiking with like truckers. But the opportunity cost of being here today or tomorrow is missing out on that game. If you like either of those teams, if you don't, then it's not really a big deal. It's not an opportunity cost. I like pro football, but I'm not really a big fan of either team, so it's not an opportunity cost to me. Remember, these are subjective. Each person is different. All right, so the implications of opportunity cost is we use marginal analysis. Marginal, in this case, refers to the next unit. So when you're looking to analyze costs and benefits, you're going to think of the cost of buying the next unit. You're not going to think of the cost of buying like all the units to get you up to that point. So marginal benefit is the additional benefit, the benefit you get from getting one more unit of a good or one more unit of an activity. And the marginal cost, same basic idea, the additional cost of one more unit of an activity or a good. So when as an example, when firms are producing, they don't worry about the cost of producing, say, 100 pizzas. They say, after producing 99 pizzas, they say, what's the additional cost of producing one more pizza? They're always thinking of what's the next one. And likewise, you don't think of like, what's the cost of all the sandwiches you bought in your entire life? You think of what's the cost of buying this next one for me? So yeah, marginal decision making is the focus of economics. We don't face all or nothing choices. So you don't choose, if you're looking between two products, you're looking like between a shirt and between dinner. It's not only food or only clothes, it's just one more unit of each. Just the lens that we look through. So what does this marginal analysis, this opportunity cost, what does it all mean? Individuals engage in an activity when the expected marginal benefit exceeds the expected marginal cost. Now this benefit is not just money, so don't think of it as just money. Think of it as what economists call utility, or like the enjoyment that you get. So, it could be the value of the good you get. Maybe you're buying good, sort of like an investment. Like, I don't know, like rich people buy art to like be a store of value and then they sell it later. Maybe, but it's not just the financial benefit down the road. Maybe you're buying the piece of art because you actually enjoy it. You look at it every day and I don't know, it looks nice. Maybe there's some sentimental value, like you knew the artist that painted it and they passed away, so it's a way to remember them. There's a lot of things just besides money that go into the benefits that we get. And the same with costs. It's not just the price you pay, but things you have to give up. And it can be like, I don't know, your family disapproving of you buying that piece of art or social pressure against it. So it's not just hard money for these costs and benefits. There's a lot of other things going into it. Individuals can be expected to refrain from an action when the expected marginal cost exceeds the expected marginal benefit. So you're not going to do something that ends up being more costly. You're not going to act to make yourself worse off. Or I use the word expected there. You expect to be worse off for buying something. You may end up making yourself worse off, but in that moment, you think you're going to be making yourself better. You only find out later that you shouldn't have spent money because the car broke down immediately. This doesn't mean that it's easy to predict other people's actions because individuals weigh their expected costs and benefits differently. So if you don't know what's going on in their head, it's going to be very difficult for you to predict what they're going to do. So it's difficult to require other individuals to make the choices that you want because they may see something as more valuable or less valuable than you. You try to ban like juuling. Like that's a big push they're making right now. Those people may see like a nicotine addiction and they think that's terrible. But people that enjoy juuling, they have a reason for wanting to do that. They have different costs and benefits than the person who wants to ban it. So preventing them from being able to buy it, outlawing it, it's difficult to get people to go along with that if they see a lot of value in being able to jewel. That's not to say that you can't ever predict what people are going to do. You can predict if costs increase relative to the benefits, people are going to do less of something. So if you ban it, you make it more difficult to get. The price goes up because there's fewer of them around. There's legal penalties if you get caught with it. Fewer people are going to jewel because there's more cost associated with it and there's no greater benefit. Likewise, if the cost goes down, you make it easier to get something. Say they reverse the ban, more people are going to do it because it's relatively less costly than before. You can't know for a fact what any individual is going to do, but if you're looking at the number of people doing it, you can see if it'll grow or shrink based on how the costs and benefits change. All right. This will be our last slide for the day. This is the law of diminishing marginal benefits. As you consume more of anything, the marginal benefit of that decreases. So if you think of just eating pizza, the first slice tastes awesome. You love it. I'm assuming everyone here likes pizza. It'd be heartbreaking if someone didn't. I'm only partially kidding. But by the time you reach that 10th slice, you're so full, your utility has decreased substantially. Here we have a little graph showing the marginal utility. So first you're getting 30, units like don't mean anything, whatever, but 30 units of happiness from that pizza, tastiness, whatever. As you move down, next slice, your second slice, you're only getting 20. The third slice, you're getting, looks like 15. And so on, it goes down and down and down. As you get more full, it doesn't taste as good. Finally, eventually, when you get to your 11th slice, your utility is negative. At that point, this person can eat a lot, but they're so full that it's like painful to eat that last slice. It's like those eating competitions. Man versus Food had been off TV for too long. Does any of you guys remember that? Got to go around and eat those, all those challenges. And he'd start out loving it. And then by the end, he'd have half of a 40-pound burger left. And he'd be sitting there sweaty and grease dripping down his face. You're like, oh, I can't do it. He's hit the negative marginal utility. So for public policy questions, the question isn't or shouldn't be, should we eliminate something or should we have something? The question should be, how much should we have? So you look at things like pollution, crime, terrorism, national defense, police. It's not a yes or no question, it's how much. At what point does our marginal utility go negative? And some of that, and this goes all the way back to scarcity. There's only so many resources. So if you put all your resources into reducing crime, you can't use those resources for education. You can't use them for national defense. You can't use them for other good things. So because we only have so many resources, you've got to choose. You got to try to use them as efficiently as possible. Get things as low as possible, without wasting money just focusing on one area. Do you guys have any questions about what we covered today?